Sanda Birda Engilizda, and welcome to Shift+F1, a podcast about speedy race cars. Could you tell I was reading that phonetically? I'll bet no one could. For my pitch perfect Azerbaijani, which means only you and Englishmen have money, which implies that the one you're speaking to is rich. One Englishman in particular this week has a lot more money now, which we will get to in a bit. I'm Drew Scanlon. Joining me is Rob Zachney. How are you, Rob?
Eager to get into this Newey news.
It's really the biggest the biggest piece of news this week, certainly, and maybe the worst kept secret for. Although no, I was going to say for a while, but it was only really hinted at, quote unquote, confirmed directly after we recorded our last episode. So it only is today, I think, that it's officially confirmed.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what Jeremy Clarkson was saying. He hinted that Newey was going to, but I think he might have been saying Williams, not. Yeah. No, I think he did. I think he might have. This was back in early September. A while ago that he indicated that Newey was probably going to Aston Martin, which is annoying. Clarkson just shooting his mouth off may have had the story first.
Yeah. If you're new to this podcast, a very warm welcome to you. And if you're new to Formula One itself, we recommend listening to our preseason primer episode, which assumes no prior F1 knowledge and explains how the sport works and who everybody is. So if you'd like to go back and listen to that, it's episode 257. Also, this show would not be possible without our audience over at patreon.com/shiftf1, where every month we release an ad-free version of the podcast, along with bonus podcasts and videos that are exclusively for our patrons, that cover racing documentaries and films, F1 video games, experiments of the racing series, and a lot of weird things. So if you would like to support the show and get access to all that fun stuff, head over to patreon.com/shiftf1 or click the link in the show notes. Rob, we have not yet landed on our next item, our next Patreon bonus subject. But we've got some ideas. Stay tuned. We usually post them toward the end of the month, so we've got some time. But yeah, if you go to Patreon, you can sign up for a tier, the title sponsor tier, like these fine folks. It's a me Ferrario, which I didn't realize because Danny has usually read these. It's spelled ITZAMI as the first name, which makes it even better, in my opinion. Get Rich or Die Ryan, Agave ATX, Cyphus Training, Turf SCS, at Team Blackjack, Michael Maves, Gordy's Army, at Talking Autos, Olivia Evans, TelemetryDeck.com, FTC, Drew Stewart, Bailey Foote, Abdullah Al-Thani, Jason Chadwick, Abraham Getchell, The Space Above Us podcast, Bunny Fiend, Sniggs, Alex Goucher, Max Voltar, Circuit Demon, Troy Stammer, William Rompf, Irvine Clinical Research, Lachlan the Madden Man, Samurai Love Story, and Jason Kelly. Okay, Rob. We teased it at the top. The big old news. Adrian Newey has landed. Houston. The eagle. Aston Martin's got wings on their logo, right? Maybe it's an eagle.
Yeah, they do. So he is going to be managing technical partner at Aston Martin, as well as a sizable shareholder. We don't know how sizable, but they keep mentioning it. So he has equity in Aston Martin as part of this deal, in addition to a salary that Autosport indicates is in the range of like 25 to 30 million. I want to say pounds.
I saw $100 million over 3 seasons plus bonuses.
Yep, it's That's quite a bit chunk of money.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's king's ransom for him. This has been obviously a long time coming. The news that he was no longer happy at Red Bull and was looking for another destination triggered a lot of teams showing interest, and Newey's reputation is such as a long time and wildly accomplished aerodynamicist and engineer in the sport. There was the way this has been sort of discussed is like, who would like the winningest, most prolific championship winning race car designer in history to come and win a championship for them? Who wants to have him come in and do for their team what he's done with stints at most memorably Red Bull, but also like McLaren, Williams. He's been around. Arguably, he's been around long enough that it contributed to one of the major reasons Red Bull's been so successful here is that when F1 went back to ground effect aerodynamics, there were not many people still in the sport at a senior level who had firsthand knowledge of designing ground effect cars and the various issues that come up with those. Adrian Newey did, and Red Bull dominated with that package. There were rumors that he was going to go to Ferrari. Obviously, the idea of him being paired with Lewis Hamilton, a kind of dream team, the greatest designer and arguably the greatest racer of their respective generations, working together at the most storied team, excited a lot of folks, but it was not to be. It kind of sounds like Ferrari tapped out of the bidding, right? Like that's the other part of this is Lawrence Stroll is made of money and has poured a lot of capital and a lot of personal prestige into the Aston Martin project, and was clearly willing to move heaven and earth and not just open up the checkbook, but again grant equity in the company to make this Newey deal happen. And it kind of sounds like there was just a point where Ferrari knew they were not going to be able to continue pursuing that. So they bowed out and kind of ceded the field to Aston. And so Alpine, it comes to fruition.
You got to trust the process. Yeah, the cynical part of me is saying, it was just about the money, but some autosport riders here, namely Mark Mann Bryans and Jake Boxall-Legg, point out two things. There's a lot less pressure going on at a team like Aston Martin versus Ferrari. And if, it seems like from reading his book, Adrian Newey is just a huge nerd and really just wants to kind of sit there and be at his drafting table and make car designs. If in the twilight of one's career, do you really want to go to the pressure cooker that is Ferrari, or do you want to just like hang out with your $100 million and maybe sketch some cars? And the other thing is like neither Newey nor Aston Martin have anything to lose. They can really only go up from where they are now, and Newey has already done everything. He has, gotten 12 constructors and 13 drivers championships, something insane. With, as you mentioned, like at least 3 different teams. I would have loved for him to have gone to Williams, just because I guess I'm a Williams stan. But I guess this is it's the thing that makes the most sense and therefore is the most boring.
Yeah, I think there's a few things there. He's been to Williams. I do wonder if there was a bit of, as endearing as James Vowles is, I do wonder if there would have been a bit of like shoulder checking there. But really, ultimately, sounds like, does anyone backing Williams have the capital to recruit Adrian Newey at this price tag? Probably not. That's probably kind of a stretch. Ferrari, similar, not quite a similar sort of thing. Like Ferrari probably could have afforded it, but it would have been enormously expensive, and you basically be saying this guy's so valuable. It's not like you're going to bring him in and not leverage it by basically turning a lot of the direction of your program over to him to some extent, and that you can sort of see where that would be. You can see where Ferrari might be leery of that. Given the direction things are going, and again the enormous expense it would take. Aston, I don't know. Like, I think that Aston has to lose is obviously a lot of money and some value of the company. If it doesn't pan out, this is one of those things where you've given someone a really rich deal, and the weight of those expectations, if they're not met, would be pretty devastating, I think, to just the vibe around the team. If they went out and spent a fortune and it turns out they got like the dregs of Adrian Newey, no reason to think that's going to happen, but also his career's kind of unprecedented. He's been sort of very clear about, like wanting to kind of have a autumn of his career, not necessarily work as hard as he's worked at Red Bull over the years. But that also does seem a little bit in tension with some of the things he said about wanting to be in on the ground floor of a program, wanting to be there sort of at the start as the sets team on a new direction. Being there in at the start and like launching a new thing in an exciting new direction and like taking it kind of easy and having more time to hang out with your wife, those two things don't really go together. So I'm curious which side of that's going to win out. But I think it really does give the Aston Martin program a much needed shot in the arm, especially as the Cinderella story that we had for a hot minute there, with the car being unexpectedly competitive last year. That's over. This team's kind of looked a little bit in the weeds of late, or at least not progressing the way you would hope. So they kind of need something exciting to show up, and there's kind of they already have like Fernando Alonso, and you can say he's an older driver, but there's probably no one person you can bring into a program that's as exciting as Adrian Newey, just because he has this potential at least to show up and be the one who figures out where F1 is headed and gets your car there first.
Yeah, to hear him say it, this quote from Autosport, Newey says, Lawrence's, referring to Lawrence Stroll, the team owner, Lawrence's passion and commitment and enthusiasm is very endearing. It's very persuasive. The reality is, if you go back 20 years, then what we now call team principals are actually the owners of the teams, Frank Williams, Ron Dennis, Eddie Jordan, etc. In this modern era, Lawrence is actually unique in being the only properly active team owner. It's a different feeling when you have somebody like Lawrence involved like that. It's back to the old school model, and to have the chance to be a shareholder and a partner is something that has never really been offered to me before. So it's a slightly different slant. It's one I'm very much looking forward to. It became a very natural choice. Interestingly, I also learned in reading these articles, Eddie Jordan is Adrian Newey's manager. Incredible. He was the guy wheeling and dealing all this stuff. Wild. Also, this racefans.net article points out that Newey will be working with Honda again. And he says, quote, I'll be very pleased to stay working with Honda. I've really enjoyed working with them over the last 6 years at Red Bull. They're a great bunch of engineers, very easy to work with. Aston Martin will have an exclusive works deal with Honda, something I forgot. So that's another bonus for him. He knows that in and out, and he'll be the only team with that particular engine on the grid.
It's all coming together. This is how Lance wins it.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of power units, Rob, if we're done with Newey for now, do you want to take it over to the other side of the channel?
Yeah. So the Alpine has laid out a sort of timeline for their decision to decide whether or not they're going to stick with building their own engines in-house moving forward or become a Mercedes customer team. There's been some activity around this. Employees at their Viri power unit R&D facility they protested at the Italian Grand Prix. Their position has been Renault without a Renault power unit isn't Renault. You're detracting from the mystique of the team, from the history of the team. It's a huge embarrassment for the team and its history to suddenly start sourcing engines from another supplier. A couple weeks ago, Flavio gave an interesting interview on this point. He was like, I'm not the bad guy here. He just said, like, I am not the person who showed up and started advocating for this. This was other people on the team want to go in this direction. The way he laid it out was kind of like the power unit isn't necessarily the problem. There have been a lot of things that have been wrong at this team, but the power unit is also not like really part of the solution. So that's just the direction we're going in, and this is not a decision that is coming from me or that's been like put on my shoulders. This is a direction that the company is kind of driving. I'm not clear, how much of this is just theater for satisfying like French layoff requirements for closing down a facility like this. Is there any chance that they come to the end of this evaluation period, and after all this, they decide we're going to stick with this engine program that's kind of been at sea for this entire generation of engines? It seems unlikely, but that is the indication from Chairman Luca Di Maio is that they're going to be making a call on this, in the coming weeks. So we will see what unfolds there. I'm of two minds. I do think it's pretty sad for a major manufacturer to just sort of toss in the towel and be like, we got to be a customer team. Mm-hmm. But the Renault engine program has been in a sad place for a long time. And that is, some of it seems like it's probably, everything around Renault Alpine has been mismanaged in the last few years. No reason to think it was different with the engine unit, but the engine unit problems kind of, was there anyone who could have looked good if the power unit was still consistently down on power? Again, we've talked about this. The engine freeze came into effect a couple seasons ago. All the engines are supposed to be basically at parity. The Alpine power unit isn't. They never got up to par with Ferrari, Mercedes, and Honda. So I don't know. It's one of those things where the thing that scares me, Drew, is that if you blow up a program like this, they're so hard. Like, it's really hard to stand these up again. The startup costs for a massive engineering, R&D, and manufacturing, workflow process, it's prohibitively expensive, and you're going to lose so much knowledge about this so fast. So if you blow it up, it's kind of irrevocable. It will be so much more expensive to ever reverse that decision. But on the other hand, I'm looking at this and it's like, this program hasn't turned out a competitive F1 engine.
Yeah. Well, you said they have given it just under a month's time to have their final decision. So by maybe the start of October, we will know which way they go. And from there, it will, either way, it's going to be interesting, whichever way they go. It'll be certainly interesting for Oliver Bearman this weekend in Azerbaijan, because he will be stepping in for Kevin Magnussen, who, as we mentioned last week, received a race ban for accumulating 12 penalty points on his F1 Super license over 12 months. So Ollie Bearman, who last subbed in for Carlos Sainz when he had appendicitis, and did a great job, started, I think, 11th and finished 7th for Ferrari. He will be jumping in for Kevin Magnussen, and will drive it seems like just for this weekend, because Magnussen is going to be back for Singapore, but that's the car that Bearman's going to be in next year. So going to get some good seat time. We'll see. I'm curious to see how he does in not a Ferrari.
The big question.
Yeah. The other big question, one of two remaining questions in the driver market. One is who is going to pair Yuki Tsunoda at RB? Will it be Ricciardo or somebody else? And who will pair Nico Hülkenberg at Sauber, soon to be Audi? Will it be Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, or somebody else? Rob, you flagged this article from Autosport. Audi admits to youth versus experience dilemma over F1 driver choice. So they're hemming and hawing here over. It sounds like Valtteri Bottas is going to be their choice for experience, one who has been with the team and indeed has more experience in the sport than Zhou Guanyu.
Already locked in with Hülkenberg too, right?
Oh, that's true. That'd
be a grizzled fucking team.
It really, really would. And I'd be hard pressed to come up with a more solid one,
right,
in terms of not screwing up, getting the most out of the car. So do you do that, or do you go with your reserve driver, Théo Pourchaire, who won the Formula 2 championship in the past, or the rising F2 star, Gabriele Bortoleto? That is another one of these. In a couple of weeks, we'll know, but Audi is not quite sure. For me, I always seem to, and maybe this is just me applying my simplistic filter to everything, I'm always like, you gotta go with experience when you're in a transition period. And I mean, every period is a transition period when you're the worst team. So you've got that, and you've got 2026. Just keep the devils in the car while you try to figure things out. But that's not the only consideration.
I'm kind of with you. Like, that car's been a dog. And there's been times where it doesn't look like that much of a dog in Valtteri's hands, but my suspicion is that car is a complete dog. And I do think now, having seen how many teams would kill for a reliable number two like Mercedes had all those years, the way that Valtteri was, like, I think, I think he was a guy who got undervalued because we were looking at him as like, well, why aren't you competing better with Lewis Hamilton? Because he's not Lewis Hamilton.
Right.
But I think when you take that out of the equation, you're left with, this is a really solid driver. Now, admittedly, I think also, like, this new school rizzed up, like Valtteri Bottas we got, is pretty fantastic. And so there's a part of me that's like, we can't get rid of bare ass naked, cycling everywhere, party in the back, Valtteri Bottas. We have to keep him in F1 as long as possible. This guy's a mascot. But setting all that aside, I'm kind of with you. I think the odds are very good this car's going to suck again next year. And I would kind of just, I would really not want to be sitting there trying to evaluate a young driver and a new car program simultaneously. I would probably give Valtteri the 2-year deal he wants. And then, so, you get through 2025, see what the program is in 2026. And then from there, you'll have a good, you can move on. You can say, like, look, it was great to do a swan song with Nico or Valtteri or maybe both. But I feel like right now, I would just want guys who've, like, seen some real shit in F1 and been good soldiers. Because I don't think the next chapter is going to be fun.
Yeah. Well, they should put us in charge.
Yeah.
That is it for news. We're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with the track walk. Rob, it's time for Baku. Baku, Azerbaijan, in the South Caucasus region, bordered by the Caspian Sea. Never been there. Seems like a weird place. But Formula One has been there every year since 2016, with the exception of 2020. Racing at the Baku City Circuit, the fourth longest circuit on the calendar. We're doing 51 laps around the 6 kilometer or 3.7 mile circuit. It was designed by who else but Hermann Tilke. We're doing 1 minute 43 laps. That's the lap record set by Charles Leclerc in 2019. 2 DRS zones here. One is in Sector 1, which is mostly square corners, as a lot of street circuits are, grid-like. Sector 2 gets a little more organic as it goes around a dang castle. If you've never seen this one before, it's very picturesque. The castle's its signature feature. Makes it feel like a Mario Kart track, and it's really tight through there. I'm not sure there is I don't know how you would mathematically measure this, but like in terms of the tightness of the turn, like if you tried to drive straight through these turns, like how much, I don't think you number one, you can't, like you have to actually wiggle your car through there, but that gap has got to be some of the tightest space on the calendar.
I mean, it's so tight. Who was it who wrecked the car and they figured out it was because their simulator data was like a quarter inch off?
I think that may have been Leclerc.
Yeah, it was just some sort of ridiculous number where because this wasn't, I don't think, like this wasn't the Codemaster sim that they've been running the track in. Like they had their own high fidelity sim, and the driver wrecked the car because you cut it that fine, and the corner is so tight that like less than an inch is pretty significant.
It's one of those ones. It's kind of like that footage from Monaco where you see them coming through that one chicane, where the tire is kind of hard to describe, but the tire goes, like the back tire goes around the corner, not because it's following its track along the ground, but because the car's momentum is hopping to the side. And so it's really something to watch. I also learned today that while most of the castle structure, or this particular tower, is dated to the 12th century, the foundation may go back to the 4th century, and it is believed to be a Zoroastrian fire temple. Many legends surround the tower, including one where a fire-haired virgin emerged from an ember that came off of the burning tower and then bested an invading commander in single combat using a flaming sword, thereby saving her people from slavery.
Fantastic. Love it.
This is where we're racing. Sector 3 is mostly one long straight that contains the second DRS zone, and it was there that Valtteri Bottas, I think, holds the unofficial speed record. When he was at Williams, the team clocked him at 235 miles per hour, which is, in kilometers, fast. Like I said, we've only been running there since 2016, but have had some fun times. This is where Vettel thought Hamilton brake tested him and then deliberately banged wheels with him behind the safety car. It's also where Roman Grosjean spun behind the safety car by himself, even though his engineer thought that Magnussen had hit him. Hamilton accidentally hit a button on his steering wheel at a restart and locked up and went into a runoff, which is why you'll see him from now on. He starts his car, like every start, he has his hand on top of his wheel to make sure he doesn't do that again. Ricciardo slammed into his teammate Verstappen at the end of the long straight. A lot of weird stuff goes on here. There's no guarantee that it's going to be a crazy race, of course. And indeed, the last 2 years have been what I'd call strategy races. Red Bull has won the last 3, Perez being the only driver so far to win it twice in 2021 and 2023. But given that, it is always a circuit that makes me excited. And with the season we're having, who knows what could happen this weekend? Who knows indeed, especially when it comes to weather. But I will do my best to predict here based on the internet site that I'm looking at. Pretty hot one, 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 Celsius with 0% chance precipitation on qualifying day. Relatively high winds though, 14 miles an hour. coming out, I'm assuming coming off the Caspian Sea, or 23 kilometers an hour. Same wind speed the following day, and only slightly cooler, 26 Celsius and 79 Fahrenheit. Also, 0 chance of precipitation. So it's going to be a hot one. It's going to be a dry one, and everyone's just going to have to hang on to their butts. Going into the weekend, our driver standings look like this. Max Verstappen is on top with 303 points. Lando Norris is in second with 241. Charles Leclerc is in third with 217. Oscar Piastri in fourth with 197. Carlos Sainz has 184. Hamilton in sixth with 164. Perez in seventh with 143. Russell's in eighth with 128, and then a jump down to Alonso in ninth place with 50, and his teammate Stroll in 10th with 24. Hülkenberg and Tsunoda are tied with 22. Ricciardo is in 13th with 12. Then we've got Gasly with 8. Bearman and Magnussen and Albon all have 6 points. And then Ocon is in 18th with 5, the last of the drivers with any points. And the zeros are Zhou, Bottas, Sargent, and Colapinto. I'm afraid Sargent will remain pointless for the rest of the season. In the constructor standings, Red Bull Racing is on top with 446. McLaren is in second with 438. That is 8 points behind. Ferrari's in third with 407. Mercedes in fourth with 292. Fifth place is Aston Martin with 74 points. RB is in sixth with 34. Gene Haas and team are in seventh with 28 points. Alpine is in eighth with 13. Williams has 6, and Sauber has 0. I saw a stat today that said the last time that 4 different teams had won 3 races, which has happened this year, was 1977. We're having a historical one, Rob.
That feels... I was gonna say, no way is that right, but I'm like, that could be right. That could be right.
Yeah. Pretty wild. All right. Those are the driver and constructor standings. If you'd like to join the standings yourself, you can do so using the link in the show notes to the official Shift+F1 Fantasy League. And you can also send us an email, shiftf1podcast@gmail.com or fn.cool/emails. Rob, you've compiled some emails here. You want to kick things off?
Yeah, absolutely. So first email comes in. Sorry, I didn't actually write down who wrote in for this one. Anyway, I've been an F1 fan for a few years, part of the Drive to Survive gang, and I've been listening to you all the whole time. After hearing your occasional insights into Indy, I started watching and have become a casual IndyCar fan. I got the opportunity to go to the Iowa GP this year and had the paddock pit lane passes as a guest of Meyer Shank Racing. It was amazing. We were able to wander freely around the pits in the morning before everything. This meant we got to see the cars taken apart and the engineers working on them. As quali in the race got closer, we were able to watch the cars get rolled in, take pictures with them, and then see the drivers walk in. While wandering the pits, we got to chat with some Meyer Shank members and hear about strategy and see them testing wheel guns. My favorite part was seeing the drivers casually walking around. We had Noah Siegel go past us on a scooter multiple times. He seemed lost. At tracks, he's a rookie. He might literally not know where a bunch of shit is. Marcus Ericsson chatting it up in a group right in front of us. Alex Pillow heading to his team, and Pato O'Ward almost running into me. Unfortunately, we never were able to track down Romain Grosjean. Before the race, we were able to hang out long enough to see Felix Rosenqvist put on his helmet and get in the car. We also got to meet Felix Rosenqvist and David Malukas. Malukas actually explained how his steering wheel had been modified because he didn't have the full range of motion after his bike accident earlier this year. They also made it clear they didn't think overtaking was in the cards, which turned out to be true. We also got to meet Elio Castroneves.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. It was a weird race to attend because it's, I think, a 7/8 of a mile track, meaning an 18-ish second lap, so there was literally no time where cars weren't flying by, and it was impossible to tell what was going on, but you could always see something. I've been to the Montreal GP a couple times, just in the grandstands, GS1 this year, and that was cool, but this was insane. Being so close to the cars and drivers and all the preparation that goes into the race made this one of the most memorable days of my life, even as a fan who wasn't crazy familiar with Indy, but loves F1. If you ever get the opportunity, it's 100% worth it, and now I'm on a mission to get as many people as I can into IndyCar. It turns out there's a lot of chaos and drama there, too. Real quick, I do have it written down who sent this in. It was Paige. So thank you very much, Paige.
Thank you, Paige. That's great. I mean, I love hearing people have a good time. I'm glad, you can have a good time without really knowing what's going on. I haven't been to it like a short track race like that before, or I don't think I've ever actually been to an oval race at all. So that's that's great. And the few IndyCar races that I have been to, they are like that. You're just the pit lane passes are not certainly as unattainable as F1 passes, and when you get them, you are just walking around among everything. There's no, aside from maybe the motorhomes, there's really no place that's off limits. You can just kind of be this transparent eyeball moving around the whole proceedings. It's awesome. It's cool you got to talk to so many people too.
Do you want the next one from Matt?
Yes. All right. Matt writes, really enjoyed your episode on Tour de France Unchained. This was the Patreon bonus episode that we did of the first half of the first season of that Netflix series. There were a few things I thought might interest you that occurred to me as I was listening. You may be interested to read a bit more about the production of the Tour de France broadcast. Yes, I am. Aside from the helicopter shots, which are obviously a huge part of the TDF broadcast, the camera shots from the motorbikes are relayed via one or two additional helicopters. Bearing in mind the many mountainous stages, there's often no clear line of sight between the peloton and cell towers or satellites. These signals are then further relayed up to two fixed-wing aircraft flying at different altitudes, which are then sent back to the production trucks on the ground and then onwards by satellite. And they have to tear down and set this up almost every day for 3 weeks. Wow. I thought E3 was bad. Matt posts some links here that I will put in the show notes.
There is a truly cool visualization of a flight tracker of those orbiting aircraft that are serving as the signal relays. Drew, I think it would be the coolest thing in the world if there's some multiplayer stuff you can do in Flight Sim, right?
Oh yeah.
It would be the coolest if we got the flight plans for the helicopters and then the chase the aircraft, and one of us could fly the chopper around the course they laid out and the other could just keep banking over it. It's a really cool visualization.
Oh, and Matt links to flightradar24.com, which has an article about this. I didn't even know they wrote articles. This is for super plane nerds. We got a Beechcraft 200 Super King Air as your fixed wing relay.
Oh, yeah.
Boy, this is you got a video technology and planes. You have sent me the right email. I'm gonna devour these. Okay, Matt goes on regarding teams. Sky/Ineos, I think it's fair to say that a lot of the negativity about that team goes beyond the notion that they were too good at nutrition and too well funded, and into the obvious allegation that they were doping. But this does have some justification. There's a good overview from The Athletic. I will also put that in the show notes. But the gist is that Sky were enthusiastic users of, quote, therapeutic use exemptions, TUEs, and either stayed just on the right side of legality or, in my opinion most likely, outright doped. The Jiffy bag, what we call a padded envelope of mystery medication, which was hand-couriered to Bradley Wiggins mid-tour, the testosterone supposedly ordered to British cycling headquarters to treat a non-athlete for ED, and the team doctor being subsequently banned from practicing medicine are too much smoke for my liking. It's quite a lot of coincidences there, Rob.
Yeah.
And all this smoke ultimately led to Sky wanting to dispose of the team, which leads us to Ineos. Yes, they are, as Rob said, a petrochemical product company, but the owner of the company, Jim Ratcliffe, is basically a cartoon villain, even by the standards of that industry. He had his charity foundation build a skiing clubhouse on the premise that they would teach needy local children to ski, offsetting his tax bill while building a luxury compound on some of the most valuable land in the Alps, which literally has an Ineos Grenadier posed on a huge ramp below it. Fortunately, the UK's charity regulator found this to be all above board after investigating. Great. Goes without saying, but he, of course, financially backed Brexit before moving to Monaco for tax reasons. Best Matt. Wow. Thank you, Matt.
The charity skiing clubhouse at like an exclusive Alpine slope. That is real piece of shit behavior. That is, I cannot believe that these loopholes. You can just drive the truck through that. I mean, it's similar to the Brett Favre thing in what was it? Was it Alabama, Mississippi? But the whole thing where it's like, this is not just a wildly expensive gym for women's volleyball. This is a community center. It's like it's that kind of shit.
Yeah. I mean, it's terrible, but this stuff is what's fun to me about sports. The weird businesses, the underhand, under the table stuff, the cartoon villains. Yeah. Thank you, Matt.
It is like, there's that line in Gatsby, the rich are different than you and I. And it's like, when that statement is uttered, the difference was so much less stark than it is now, where it's like, oh no, you like Scott thought the rich were different than normal people in like the Roaring '20s. Just had no idea how absolutely twisted it could get. That's incredible. Posing his little Ineos Grenadier at the base of his mountain also is just incredible stuff. Patrick writes in, love the pod. I've been a Patreon supporter for a while. I have a review recommendation. Grand Tour, One for the Road on Amazon Prime. This is advertised as the series finale after 22 years of Jeremy Clarkson, James May, and Richard Hammond and their automotive hijinks. The idea isn't a review of this episode exactly, but the impact of the series, Top Gear, and Grand Tour, and the hosts on automotive entertainment. I'd say the impact is substantial. The series molded much of today's automotive entertainment content, directly or indirectly. It was the #1 series in the world back when the industry used to release numbers. Pretty incredible. As a producer, an interesting idea would be to watch Season 1, Episode 1 of Top Gear from the BBC. It's around. And compare that with this month's finale episode and chat about how the show has changed, automotive content has changed, and the world has changed. You'd also fill in with some episodes throughout the years with F1 drivers as guests. This was a formative show for me and many others my age, mid-40s. Now there's derivative car content all over YouTube and elsewhere, but back then this was it. The series mirrored my own journey, and it'll be bittersweet to see it go. You're a bit younger, so maybe you're not as connected, but I bet many listeners are or were viewers. It's an interesting thought. I'll admit, when I saw the trailers go out for the final Grand Tour, I haven't watched Grand Tour. We'll get to why in a moment, but it did. I felt something. The notion that like Clarkson, May, and Hammond won't be doing this show anymore. That this is going to be over, and it got me thinking about. This was also a huge show for me. This occupied a huge place in my life, in my heart, for a number of years there. And then, real abruptly, I just couldn't take it anymore. It was the fact that, what started as, like, regrettable lapses in judgment and, like, sensitivity started to reveal itself more as, like, Clarkson in particular is kind of a provocateuring asshole, right? And the right up to the edge of racism or over the line stuff was not a bug, it was a feature for him. And I remember when BBC finally had enough and they started Grand Tour, I was like, this could, we'll give it another shot. We'll have fun. And like within about 5 minutes, I was kind of reminded like why I found it increasingly difficult to just sort of like keep it moving around those awkward moments and get to the good stuff. Because like Clarkson in particular was so hell-bent on being a guy who's like, I can say this, right? And it was really hard to take, and it soured me on a lot of it. But I can't deny that show was like transformative, and these guys like doing these types of car reviews were kind of the best to ever do it. Like this whole way of presenting cars and like sharing love of cars, they were so good at this.
Yeah, I was introduced to it in college by a friend of mine, and I couldn't get enough of it. Not only for the car stuff. Like, if you've never watched it, it's ostensibly a car show, but it's more than that. It's an entertainment show. It's a kind of a talk show. They kind of just do stunts. Some like maybe 20% of it is actual, like, we tested this car and here's what we think of it. For me, it also, I hold it up as just a really strong piece of production. It's an incredibly strong production. The cinematography, the editing, the everything, the music, the way that music plays a huge part in this. Just the way that an unscripted show could be. It was unlike anything I had ever watched before, and I still hold it up as like one of the best examples of what that kind of filmmaking can be. So I also hold it in pretty high regard, and it was sad just kind of see this crumbling of it over the past few years. I'm with you. Watching the Grand Tour, I watched a few episodes and it just didn't seem to have the same charm to it. I don't know if that was exclusively due to Clarkson's stuff or the fact that just like maybe you can't go home again. But yeah, it's certainly was formative on me, and I acknowledge it to be formative on a lot of people.
Yeah, it might be worth us like covering some of the stuff suggested. Season 1, I remember watching all of Season 1 of Top Gear. And it's just such a different show at that point. Like, it's so BBC trying to have like, they hadn't figured out what the show was going to be. BBC also trying to do public service type stuff. So it was like, here's how you shop for a cheap used car.
Yeah. I mean, frankly, the fact that like, that's maybe what made the show so magical is that you had that mandate in there. And so there was always this tension. And maybe I'm burning good pod here, but like,
there was a while, and then there was a point where they just let BBC realized this is an export commodity, and we're just going to give these guys budget to do whatever. Did you ever see the one where they went to the North Pole, and it was a race between like tricked out like ATVs like driving across the snowpack versus Richard Clarkson Richard Hammond doing the traditional like sled dog thing?
Wow, no.
So. And this was like when they did their sort of higher concept stuff where it would become really compelling, and sometimes you would end up like, oh, this accidentally kind of turned into an affecting little movie. Yeah. That there's a point early in that where like they talk to an Arctic explorer and he's like, you don't understand. Like, you got, like, basically he's in so many words, like, you guys seem like assholes and you're not taking this seriously. And he's like, you don't understand what it's like up there. You don't understand like how cold you can get or how miserable. You're going to get to a point where like you hate each other. And that hatred's going to be real. It's not going to be an illusion. Like, you're actually going to want to kill each other out there. And you're just going to have to keep moving. And they're like, ha, yeah, okay, fine. We're doing this Lux style. It's not going to be that hard. And sure enough, there's a point where there's just no easy way to do it. Even if you're in a, Lux SUV with tons of mechanics and engineers keeping your ass rolling, there's a point where you just don't want to be out there. anymore. Like on the way they are on the way to the North Pole. And you would stumble on moments like that where these guys would go through like oddly emotional little journeys. On these adventures. I think you'd also say it's a story of a show to some extent. The production having such a run of like we can do whatever we want and get away with it. Like it always works out. It's all gold. That they start taking it too casually. Richard Hammond's funny car accident was nearly fatal. Like very close. It was not a well-conceived segment. It was dangerous. And like he nearly died doing it. And then Top Gear finally got shut down with its new cast because they did a similar thing. And I think like a really beloved like footballer who was working with them as a presenter, ended up having a horrific accident that's like done serious like physical injury to his like face and head. Just a devastating accident that, again, in the after action review, it was like he was doing something he wasn't qualified to be doing, and there weren't enough safeties in place to keep it from being like lethally dangerous. But it, in general, it always worked out for these guys until it kind of didn't. So it's a fascinating series, the story of Top Gear, and the legacy it has on like car culture and how these things are covered. It's huge, and I think it's discussed less because I do think a lot of folks who really loved the show also ended up at a certain point kind of feeling like I can't be riding with these guys anymore. I can't be like Jeremy Clarkson is who he is, but like he's my beloved racist uncle. There's just a point where it's like, he's kind of just a racist uncle at this point, and kind of an asshole. So I think it's the reputation kind of shrinks a little bit because of that. Even though I think it's as popular as ever. I don't think my parents ever watched Top Gear, but my dad during COVID was like, "You ever watch this Clarkson's Farm? It's incredible." And it's like, yeah, Clarkson's peculiar genius is watching like having people watch him like fuck up repeatedly, trying to do something, and it being enormously watchable.
Yeah. I would read the book. I would read the Top Gear book. I don't need it to be written by any of the presenters. I want to hear it from the producer's perspective.
Yep. Drew, you want to read this next one?
Yeah. All right. Dave writes, like a lot of people, I'm enjoying the increased competition in the F1 championship, but I'm starting to get annoyed with some of the chatter around McLaren and their, quote, lack of support for Norris. While I like Lando and I like the team, despite what seems like a bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to decision making, and I'd love to see Lando snatch the trophy, I think a lot of people are slightly losing perspective on the Drivers' Championship race. While the McLaren is the fastest car on track, I don't think it's as dominant as last year's Red Bull. Mercedes has also closed the gap, and on the right day, Ferrari can win a surprise race as we saw at Monza. So I think that even if everything goes well, it seems far from certain that Lando and McLaren can pull off the completely dominant run that would enable him to become driver's champion. He'd need to win everything well ahead of Max without any interruptions from a Mercedes or Ferrari, and I think that McLaren has a clear-eyed view on the likelihood of that happening. While some commentators are asking what happens if they don't use team orders and Lando comes 8 or 9 points short, I'm asking the other question. What happens if they undermine Oscar and Lando still comes 8 or 9 points short because of a couple of Leclerc, Hamilton, Russell, or Sainz cameos? They will have undermined their relationship with Oscar for nothing, and I also suspect that Lando wouldn't like to be handed easy positions if he hasn't earned them on his own merit, especially if it's ultimately for nothing. Loving the 24 season, but I'm not sure I'll continue loving it if every piece of commentary for the rest of the year is going to harp on McLaren not doing everything they can to try achieve a result I think is mostly out of their reach. I think that is well said. I am also a bit tired. I think we can get a little skewed from commentary. Commentators need things to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think some reporting also just follows on with that sort of sentiment. And I think it might also, there's actually an article to this effect on race fans. I think the coverage, most of it British, can hyperfixate on British drivers sometimes. It's not to say that like they necessarily, have bias toward them winning, but they do fixate on them. This is something Adrian Newey said in this article from racefans.net. From the outside, I'm not sure people fully appreciate and understand Max because just like they didn't with Sebastian, because first of all, there's a sort of demonstration that both of them suffered at times, which I think is very unfair. Maybe that's also a little bit of the British media, if I'm honest. Sky have a huge influence around the world. Their viewing is truly international, but their coverage is quite nationalistic, dare I say, and that can have an influence. Now, I don't want to put any words in Dave's mouth, but it's something that I have trouble shaking sometimes. And I mean, it's natural,
Yeah, I think there is a lot of it, just a strange dynamic of people think F1 should operate the way it has in the recent dynasties they've watched, and if a team isn't optimizing for that, then they're doing something wrong or stupidly. I think this is one of those things where everyone basically like commentators are like getting on a soapbox and really yelling, why isn't McLaren making the sport worse? That, really in a lot of ways that's what we're coming down to is like, why aren't the teams just like completely, why are you letting these two guys race each other? Why are you letting these two guys have any sort of like competition in the results?
Right, when the opposite has been the complaint in the past.
Yeah. Well, no, because if you're Max, then it like doesn't count because Max has never faced a real challenge. There's something to that. You could argue that like he's just been so compelling a driver with his type of, preferred car setup that like suddenly every driver has ended up like piloting an alien machine because it's like quite rightly built for Max. But you also just say, maybe it hasn't been as drastic as that, and he's just smoking these guys. But it is not an easy thing to have two drivers be like that close together in performance. It's kind of an oddity to have like two potential number ones, and then you're saying, well, we'll wait and see how it plays out before the team weighs in and sort of anoints their winner. It's an odd thing. I think you've probably nailed the biggest part of this, which is people need stuff to talk about. And one of the things you can talk about is McLaren screwing this up. And I think McLaren have made mistakes. I think there have been moments they've really shown like a lack of poise. Like I do think the further we gotten into this, the more bizarre I've found that entire radio exchange with with Lando at Hungary. I fundamentally don't the wailing and renting of garments over the air was kind of weird there. So I do think there's moments like the team shows a lot of like they haven't been here before, but yeah, fundamentally I don't think I don't think we're anywhere near the position where the team should be like trying to pick a winner here. And if they wanted to like help Lando out, if they'd swapped them around that last race, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. But yeah, the notion that they need to like, I don't know, that it's like a presidential election where it's like it's time for the intra-team fight to be over and we all need to rally behind the one driver who's allowed to like compete for this championship. I just don't think we want F1 to work that way. It's not historically, it's not been fun. I look back on a lot of the Schumacher years and I wonder like, first of all, it's shocking the degree to which his stock has fallen. Right, like I think that is such a black mark against him is that the degree to which people feel a lot of those accolades, a lot of those wins were kind of gifted. No one was allowed to fight with him in a Ferrari, and I think Ferrari carried that path that sort of tradition forward to their detriment for a long time. But the other thing is like I do think like there are moments that you saw real flashes that like Rubens Barrichello was a great driver. And we don't know how great a driver he was because he wasn't allowed to show how great a driver he was. And I think that diminishes the sport. I think that diminishes the champion.
Well said. Well, if you would like to send us an email, again, you can do so at shiftf1podcast@gmail.com or f1.cool/emails. You can also hit us up on the socials, which are linked in the show notes. And that is us around the internet. And now it is time to take us around the world. Our race calendar looks thusly. Formula 2 will be joining Formula 1 at the Baku City Circuit. The NASCAR Xfinity Series will be racing at Watkins Glen International for Mission 200 at the Glen. Motocross Grand Prix is in Shanghai for the Motocross Grand Prix of China. IndyCar is at the Nashville Super Speedway for the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix. This is the title decider, I believe.
Yep.
And let's see, we've got WEC, everyone, the World Endurance Championship. Pronounce all those letters. It's an acronym, not an initialism, apparently. The 6 Hours of Fuji are happening at the Fuji International Speedway in Oyama, Sunto District, Shizuoka Prefecture. We've got the NHRA at Maple Grove Raceway in Monton, PA, for the Pep Boys Nationals. And we got NASCAR. We are also racing in the hallowed grounds of Watkins Glen for the Go Bowling at the Glen.
My favorite sponsor for these things.
The Venn diagram of NASCAR fans and bowling fans is a circle. And Formula 1, maybe you heard of it. Things will kick off this Friday, September 13th, at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Time. That's Free Practice 1 on ESPN2. Then Free Practice 2 is at 9 a.m. Eastern on ESPN2. Saturday the 14th, Free Practice 3 is at 4:30 a.m. on ESPN2, followed by qualifying that Saturday at 8 a.m. on ESPN2. And the race, everyone, Sunday, September 15th at 8 a.m. Eastern on ESPN. Too early for me. Too early for my Pacific Coast blood. But that's it for our pre-Baku show. Rob, final thoughts ahead of the Baku weekend.
Did Danny not send in an excerpt from the grimoire?
Danny did not send in. Let me check Discord one last time. Nothing from the Raceonomicon.
All right.
Yep. Apologies.
Upsetting.
Yep.
Really too bad. Yeah, I'm excited for where F1 finds itself right now as a sport. I think it's I'm did not think I'd be sitting here at the end of the season really having no idea what the rest of it holds. And that may not mean like there's going to be a fight for the drivers' championship. Doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of stoked for this whole notion of there's a lot of teams in it with a shot.
That's maybe the weirdest part about this whole Lando thing is like, guys, you don't need to be pushing this so hard because the sport is exciting, even if there is an outside chance of someone not Max winning.
I was thinking about this. Do you see the Tour de France Fama, the women's Tour de France?
No.
Incredible ending, like just one of the most astonishing. Like margin of victory was like 4 seconds.
Whoa.
Decided on the final stage.
Wow.
And some of that was like there was a misfortune that like the strongest cyclist in the event, Demi Vollering, like had a good lead in stage 5, got caught up in a big accident, lost a ton of time, but like tried to gain it all back in the final stage. And she got up to this huge lead in the final stage. She's racing up. It's the toughest stage they got. It's like an iconic Alpine stage, brutal elevation, gorgeous views. They're basically cycling right up into the cloud layer. And the woman, leading is obviously behind, right? The Vollering is trying to win it with like getting a huge lead, and then the woman behind her has to finish just within the margin of victory in order to hold on to it. And for a long time, they don't know who won. Like, it was so close that because there's bonus time is awarded for how it all shakes out. For a long time, the people who organized the race were doing math to figure out, like, are we sure when we announce the winner that we're calling the right winner? We're sure that, like, the results aren't liable to shift here. And so for a few minutes there, both cyclists basically dead with exhaustion. Think they might have won. At the very least, one's won this stage, but maybe hasn't won everything. And you're kind of left with, at a moment like that, what does any of this mean, right? Like, does it only matter if Demi Vollering wins the championship? Does the ride go away? Do we not care about, like, how it all came down? Does the effort become something you regard as, like, well, it was squandered? Like, she lost by 4 seconds. After that heroic effort, didn't matter, came a 4 seconds short, couldn't make it up at the end. Is that how we regard this? There's moments I think you can see it in athletes where they kind of feel like gutted they didn't pull it off. But I also think there's something about sport, the reason we watch it is you're always seeing these questions of, like, what does any of this mean on a given day? What does it mean to be the best on a given day? What does it mean to be the best over a season? What does it mean when, like, you might have a moment of greatness, but it doesn't translate into you winning the whole title, that you get the big prize at the end of the season? What does one good day mean in the context of that? And I think that's something that we lose sight of by focusing too much on championships, that it takes so much effort day in, day out to win one race, to win one game. And we tend to flatten this down, and I think crush our own enjoyment of sport and our appreciation of sport by saying, like, well, how does this affect the points tally at the end of the year? Mm-hmm. And it can't be about that. It can't be about that for the drivers. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. It's
Rob, that's kind of what this entire podcast is about.
Yeah.
And learning enough about the sport to enjoy more than just the end result.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I regard all this. Is I think so often in sport, we turn into a discussion of, like, who's going to win the big prize at the end. And what makes sport compelling is that you're tested every day, and you don't know what that test is going to look like. You don't know what the result's going to be, but, like, the trial is what we're here to watch. And the championship is a different question, but it isn't the most important question on the day. And that's kind of how I regard the rest of the season. I'm kind of glad we've had a year like this, because it's kind of been me letting go of, well, do we have a viable championship competition here? For years, that's been the metric of, like, is it an interesting season or not? We might not have a really tense drivers competition for the World Driver Championship this year. It might be the best year of F1 I've seen in ages. Yeah. And I'm realizing as it goes along that I would prefer this. You know what I mean? Like, if we had, like, year after year of this, but for some fluke, the Drivers' Championship was always locked down, I wouldn't care. This is the most dynamic version of the sport.
Well said. Well, if you'd like to support the show and get access to all of our bonus episodes, the ad-free version of the podcast, and the official Shift+F1 Discord, you can do so over at patreon.com/ShiftF1. Have a good race weekend, everyone. We will see you all next week.
All right.
You gonna leave him hanging, Rob?
Damn it, I forgot the Neum. I was thinking about the Grimoire.